I now have a podcast called Not a Halo Podcast with my friends Noah, Alex, and Neo. So go check it out. Link is in the description. Halo is known for a great deal of things, including breathtaking worlds, a diverse set of weapons, and of course, ruthless enemies. During Halo's first decade or so, the Covenant, a highly religious alliance of alien species, and the Flood, a universe-threatening parasitic alien lifeform, was definitely enough. But seeing as most of the threats were eliminated by the end of Halo 3, Microsoft's new studio, 343 Industries, wanted to have a go at creating a new faction of enemies, something that would prove to be easier said than done. The Prometheans divided the Halo community. Was this a fresh new take on the Forerunner aesthetic, or an insult to lifelong fans who grew up with the old art style? Whatever the case, the Prometheans are nowhere to be seen in Halo Infinite. Yet. What if these Forerunner killing machines returned as part of a campaign DLC? What would they look like? It's time to redesign Halo. Greetings, Furnisage here. In this episode of Redesigning Halo, we'll be taking a look at one of the most requested videos as of late, Redesigning Prometheans. Although, before we begin, I want to clear some things up. This is a very touchy subject. Some people love the design of the Prometheans in Halo 4 and 5, while some can't stand them. So whatever I do, I can't please everyone. But to make sure this turned out as good as possible, I decided to at least try my best at including aspects of both styles, even though at its core, this is still my style. So keep that in mind. These are fan-made redesigns, so don't take them too seriously. And since this is such a huge task, my lovely Spartan 2 patrons decided to help me, as well as the Forerunner aesthetic guru himself, LateNightGaming. Now, without further ado, let's begin. The dog-like crawlers are one of the more interesting Prometheans. While you might envision Forerunner machines either walking or flying, the crawlers, just as the name suggests, crawl on all fours. In Halo 4, they even had the ability to crawl on walls and ceilings, further increasing their terrifying demeanor. I say terrifying because of its beetle-like face, which consists of two giant mandibles responsible for firing at enemy targets. As for the design as a whole, it goes for a strangely organic look when compared to the previous Forerunner machines, which can make sense seeing as Prometheans are their own thing among the Forerunners. Although, when redesigning the crawler, my main goal was definitely to make it look more traditionally Forerunner, while giving it a unique flair in another way. Listening to the panel Why Halo Looks Like Halo, one of the artists who worked on the Forerunner aesthetic in Halo Infinite, Ben Mauro, brought up the fact that to honor the classic Forerunner designs, the team focused on patterns and textures, as opposed to the more heavily shape-oriented design language of 343's earlier games. So to make sure these new takes on Prometheans will look at home in Halo Infinite, I decided to focus on just that, keeping the shapes simple while putting more focus on texturing. So here's my redesign. First thing you notice with my redesign is how robotic it looks. While controversial, I think giving them one single eye, and therefore making them more lifeless, makes sense for most of the Prometheans. This machine isn't an evil monster with a personal vendetta against you, it's just following protocol, and doing what it was programmed to do: eradicate the local infestation. The head, while very different, somewhat keeps the mandibles, but loses the ability to shoot. Instead, my patrons came up with the idea of placing the weapon on the back, making it less awkward. Now as for the lights, I decided to make them lavender. While being somewhat of an homage to the eye of the Halo 3 Sentinel, I also thought it was a great way of making them fit in with the rest of the Forerunner aesthetic, while still being something quite unique, and mixed with the small peach lights scattered all over the design. It ultimately reminds you of the Forerunner weaponry we've seen so far in Halo Infinite. And Late Night, quite early on, you had some ideas to make it more robotic. Tell us a bit about your process.
So, with the crawler, it never made much sense to me that it was so organic and dog-like, because according to the lore, only the Knight is the real organic one in the Prometheans arsenal. Most of them are just automated drones, sentries of some kind. They're war machines. So, what I was thinking with the crawler is I was kind of inspired by, weirdly enough, have you ever seen the briefcase gun? It's not very practical, but the idea of something that can kind of camouflage or blend in and then it uncurls into something that you can use, that was kind of interesting to me. So the crawlers, they're designed for infiltration, right? They infiltrate flood ships, they're very good in tight corridors. Well, wouldn't it be kind of interesting if the crawlers had this like powered down mode where they would blend into their surroundings? They'd slot themselves into the walls, configure themselves and attach to Forerunner obelisks and stuff. And the idea is when an intruder trips an alarm, it seems like the walls themselves are unfolding and suddenly you're surrounded by these little Boston Dynamics robots of an ancient alien race. That machine design is also where the wires and tubes came from, because Forerunner machines are no strangers to things like that. I mean, the Enforcer Sentinels in Halo 2 used rockets, you know? It's not all floaty bits. The Forerunners did have a lot of, I guess, modern-day Earth-like design. That's just kind of the style of sci-fi that Halo goes for.
Gameplay-wise, I imagine the crawlers in Infinite go back to their old behavior from Halo 4. Allowing them to climb on walls and ceilings. We could even see the return of some different variants. The possibilities are truly infinite. While different, the crawler redesign keeps the K9 silhouette, and it's still, despite its adorable eye, quite threatening. Let me know what you think about this redesign. The Promethean soldier was introduced in Halo 5 Guardians, and more or less filled the role of an elite. What stood out about the soldier was their human behavior, despite them being fully artificial. While the trend was started in Halo 4, they went all in on what the Halo community has nicknamed the floaty bits. These chunks of metal hover around the soldier, making them very expressive, further humanizing them. And speaking of humanizing, the face goes all in on human features, with 2 eyes and a mouth with a full set of teeth. When redesigning the soldier, I knew I wanted to make it more grounded and robotic. I just didn't know to what extent. And while the floaty bits were a little overused in the original, I wanted to see if I could rework them to better suit this redesign. And here's my design. The soldier was tricky, especially when it came to the face. I tried multiple times to include the mouth, but time and time again, I realized the mouth had to go. While it works for the art style in those games, I think this uniform, robotic look for the Prometheans fits Halo Infinite's art style better. But to compensate for this, I imagine the mouthpiece moves when the soldier talks, to make it keep at least some humanity. But at the end of the day, these are machines. And since another member of the Promethean family is more human, I thought I'd try my best to remove some humanizing elements of the soldier's design. So instead of strictly following the human anatomy, I modified the shape of its limbs, most notably the legs, to be more unnatural, ditching the weirdly human calves. Now, as for the floaty bits, after realizing quite a lot of people thought they had potential, I decided to give them a shot. And honestly, this design wouldn't work without them. While I thought they cluttered the design in Halo 5, in a more controlled fashion, I think they really give the soldier its own personality. I also wanted them to be more deliberate, to have a meaning, so I gave them some glow to act as some kind of anti-gravity energy. So Late Night, what was your idea with this redesign?
So the Prometheans are another one that we tried to better design to reflect the fact that it's not supposed to be housing a human intelligence. And we also redesigned it a bit to fit that Forerunner look a little bit better. It's got that little eyepiece that a lot of Forerunner floating machines have, such as the monitors and the sentinels, as well as we tried to make it seem less organic in its design, a little bit more blocky and stuff like that. The soldier drone also to me is supposed to be kind of like a mass-produced, very simplified representation of what the Forerunners believe in. I was kind of inspired actually by the Iron Legion from Avengers Age of Ultron, having this mass-produced army that best represents your own beliefs. And I was kind of thinking about how creepy that would be if the Promethean soldiers were mass-produced with the idea of enforcing the mantle or defending from flood attacks. You could almost picture a Forerunner dropship landing on a civilized world, millions of soldiers just spilling out of it, dragging people out of their homes and soullessly, robotically announcing that everybody is safe, for the holders of the mantle are here to protect you. And just nothing is behind that eye of theirs. There's no person behind it, you know? It's just something creepy, cold, and drone-like.
As for the gameplay of the soldiers, I imagine it's quite similar to what we have in Halo 5. But instead of the short teleportation jumps they make in that game, I want to utilize the floaty bits as some sort of thrusters, giving them the ability to swiftly avoid incoming fire. This also keeps the more grounded idea of my vision of the Prometheans. The soldier redesign keeps the disjointed human look of the original, but in a more subtle fashion. Let me know what you think about this redesign. When it comes to the overall poor reception of the Prometheans, it's safe to say the Watcher is the biggest culprit. While most complaints were directed towards the gameplay side of things, the design really perplexed a lot of people, including me. On one hand, the Watcher is the most easily recognizable Promethean, with its two big floating discs, keeping things quite simple actually. But at a closer look, it's revealed it has a full face, which, by the way, looks way too much like Locke's helmet, with parts resembling limbs. Details which, in my opinion, just overcomplicates an otherwise beautiful design. So I knew I wanted to keep the recognizable aspect of the design, while totally reworking the center of it. And here's my redesign. Squinting, this design is not too different from the source material, aside from the change in color. While being more smooth, the discs were kept mostly the same, as well as the four pieces around the middle. But as I mentioned, the center of the design saw a complete overhaul. To go all in on the recognizable aspect, I made the eye quite large, to at least give it some form of personality. And to make it look more in line with the Forerunner style, I took some inspiration from our old friend, the Sentinel. I give it a pair of small arms, giving you a sense of it being able to repair not only their masters, but also damaged areas of their installations. The mouth area, which acts as the weapon, is even more or less stripped straight out of a Sentinel. Late Night brought up the idea of taking inspiration from the monitors as well, giving it a more round look compared to the other Prometheans. What ideas did you have for the Watcher?
So the Watchers are another one that I was thinking about how we can redesign this thing to be a bit more drone-like to better reflect its role and identity. At first, we tossed around some ideas of how can we block it up a little bit to make it kind of look Sentinel-like, but ultimately the Watcher is a little bit too circular in its design. But then there was this idea of, well, what if we take inspiration from the monitors and kind of design these drones, these support aerial units to almost look plausibly like Forerunners at the end of the Forerunner Flood War when resources are running really low. They began kind of cannibalizing their own monitor chassis and redesigning them to fit this Watcher role. You know, you look at this new Watcher redesign and you can kind of see where the Forerunners began using scraps and parts from monitors to construct this thing.
When it comes to the gameplay of the Watcher, I imagine it's quite similar to the Halo 4 version, but with a twist. At first, it might seem really hard to hit, but as soon as you get a few good shots on one of the discs, it gets shot off, which causes the watcher to lose its balance, making it less swift and agile. This increases your chance of hitting its weak point, the eye. But if you manage to shoot both discs off, the watcher will drop to the ground and creepily start crawling towards you using all the strength it has left, with cables and sparks in its trail. And if it gets close enough, it detonates. Quite silly, but it will give them some well-needed gameplay complexity. At first glance, the Watcher redesign is quite faithful to what came before, but the all-new body gives it a completely different personality. Let me know what you think about this redesign. Last, but undoubtedly not least, the Promethean Knight. Ever since their introduction in Halo 4, the Knight has been the main representative for the Prometheans, with its large, looming silhouette and creepy smile. But this time around, the human features actually make sense, seeing as the Knights are composed human beings stuck in a mechanized body. As for my opinion on the Knight, it's a bit complicated. On one hand, I love their threatening stature, but on the other, I think the visual noise makes it difficult for you to appreciate the love that went into this design. Aspects of the design, such as the tiny human arms, just adds unnecessary detail to a design with such potential. So for my redesign, I knew I wanted to keep the silhouette of the Knight, but change the overall detail. And here's my redesign. As stated, I kept the shapes rather close to the original, with a huge backpack and the thin legs. But the actual texturing and detail gives us something entirely new. Gone are the two eyes, and instead, I decided to give it a circular eye, making it way more lifeless and terrifying. But to still give it some sense of humanity, I gave it some lights resembling teeth, honoring the iconic grin. And just like the other members of the Prometheans, I gave it lavender lights, with peach-colored detail lights to add some complexity to this overall simple design. The reason for the lights, the texture, and most notably the eye being such a staple among these redesigns is because I want them to feel more uniform. I want you to be able to see right away that these are not only Forerunner, they're Promethean, and they won't be mistaken for anything else. So tell us a bit about your process with this design, Late Night.
So in regards to the Knight, there was this idea during the production of Halo 4 that I've kind of always latched onto and really liked. The idea was that there would be a harsh separation between the organic elements of the Knight and the Forerunner elements of the Knight. There's even a piece of concept art where you can see an ancient human that is almost strapped into an exoskeleton that's moving on its own, and he's almost more or less a prisoner powering this thing with his own intelligence, and it's very sad looking. And what we got in the final game, it didn't really make a lot of sense to me. It didn't really look like something the Forerunners would create. It didn't really match the look of the Halo universe that well. So we were thinking of ways that we can redesign the Knights to better look like Forerunner pieces of machinery. And something that I think would actually be very creepy for the Knights is the idea of stripping away a lot of those organic elements. You know, the Knights have shins and like calves in Halo 4, and it's like, let's get rid of some of those, let's block up and roboticize a lot of those limbs to make it seem more like a drone or an armature of some kind. And then, wouldn't that be very creepy if the idea is you're an organic person, you look down, you can see your own flesh, you can feel the blood pumping through your veins, and then that soul of yours is ripped out and put into something robotic, stiff, cold, and unfeeling. How that would drive you insane. I always had this vision in my head of what a Knight might look like in something like Halo Infinite, and the idea was you'd have this machine powered down, kind of in a stasis mode, and then it comes online, and it just, this metallic shriek is let out, and it's just going crazy, and it's sparking and twitching, and you could see clumps of dust falling off of it because of how old it is, and you get the idea that deep inside there somewhere, behind that cold, unblinking eye, is a terrified, human intelligence, because organic minds, we need our bodies to survive, you know? We operate based off pheromones, chemicals, and stuff, and what would that do to a human mind if you ripped it out of its body and put it inside of a machine? It would probably drive you crazy. So yeah, with the Knights, the idea was get away from that techno-organic Halo 4 look and really highlight the fact that this is a human mind trapped inside the body of a Sentinel, essentially.
Now as for the gameplay, the Knight was more or less perfected in Halo 5 in my opinion. The more tank-like approach made it fit a niche somewhere between an elite and a hunter, serving as sort of a mini-boss. So all the previous gameplay features, such as the Knight showing its skull when you anger it, is included. While not really a gameplay aspect, I think the sounds they make could add to the creepy ambience. Just imagine hearing something that sounds like a human crying and screaming for help, but when you round the corner, there's a 9-foot-tall robotic monster ready to tear you to pieces. Think the bear from Annihilation. Those who know, they know. The Knight redesign, while very different, keeps the defining characteristics of the original design, and goes for a more robotic look. Let me know what you think about this redesign. And there we have it. That's each member of the Prometheans redesigned. Some fairly recognizable, some radically different, but remade to better suit the art style of Halo Infinite. As stated, this is a very controversial topic, so let's get some healthy conversations going in the comment section. Remember, we're all entitled to our own opinion, so it's important we respect one another, even though we have different tastes. This is what I would do with them. Let me know how you would have handled it. And a huge thanks to LateNightGaming for all the help. Link to his YouTube will be in the description. In case you aren't subscribed to him, make sure to check out his videos. They're really what inspired me to start making YouTube content. My patrons have also been a huge help in giving me ideas and feedback. And if you also want to be a part of my redesigning process, make sure to check out the Patreon. Link is in the description. And while you're at it, check out the podcast I'm in, Not a Halo Podcast, where we try and likely fail to talk about anything but Halo. I want to thank my Spartan 2s. That one guy, D Marshmallow, Sean, Ripcorded, and Hitsuyona Kurorento. And my Spartan 4, Andrew and Dyer. If you like this video, give it a like. If not, a dislike. And let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I wish you all the best, and take care. Vernissage, out.